Our first session, we have an amazing speaker for you. We'll be focused not just on the current impact of COVID in the community, but we'll also discuss the aftermath of this crisis, which we anticipate to be far-reaching and will affect the future if we do not identify the areas that need the most help and begin to provide the assistance that is needed. Dr. Cynthia Romero is a graduate of the CIVIC class of 2018. I think she will attest that she will say it's the best class ever. She's the director of the Brock Institute for Community and Global Health at the Eastern Virginia Medical School, which leads collaborative educational, clinical, and research efforts improving the health of all people in the community. Previously, Cyn Romero was the Virginia State's Health Commissioner, president of Virginia Academy of Family Physicians, president of Medical Society of Virginia, and chief medical officer and vice president for quality and medical affairs for the Chesapeake Regional Medical Center. Dr. Romero also worked for 20 years at her mother's Romero family practice. It's my pleasure to welcome Hampton Roads native, Dr. Cyn Romero. Cyn, the virtual floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah Jane, for that very generous introduction. And good morning to all of you, especially the CIVIC class of 2020. Yes, the best class ever, secondary to the class of 2018. I also want to thank all the others who have joined us for this webinar this morning, especially our alumni. We'll get right to it. I was privileged to be asked to share some perspective on how the pandemic has changed healthcare, not just in Hampton Roads, but across our country. So I'll have Amesa change the slide. So in the brief moments that I have with you, I wanted to review the quick timeline of COVID-19 over the course of 2 months. We'll discuss some responses of the healthcare sector, share some of my perspectives on inspiring innovations, and also talk about some of the lessons that are being learned. Next slide. So very briefly, we have the timeline of the COVID-19 process. So here in Virginia, we saw our first case that was reported on March 7th, a Marine in Fort Belvoir, but the first death did not occur until March the 11th, a senior citizen up in James County. Then you see on March 12th, the governor declares a state of emergency. Then on the 23rd, he closed all the schools for the rest of the academic year. And then March 30th, he issued the stay-at-home order. And then just this past Monday, on May 11th, Virginia exceeded the 25,000 number of cases across the Commonwealth. And at that time, we had 850 deaths. And today, we are just over 26,000 cases across Virginia and over 900 deaths. And then at 12:30 a.m. tomorrow is the beginning of phase 1 of easing the restrictions of those orders. Next slide. So what did the healthcare sector do in response to all of that? Well, everyone from the healthcare system to the physician offices to the public health sector and any of the support organizations that are related to health and healthcare started communicating more and looking at information from the Virginia Department of Health, World Health Organization, CDC, to really see what this was all about. Then they started looking at their internal inventories of supplies, particularly starting with the personal protective equipment, ventilators, but also pharmaceuticals, IV fluids, the blood supply, and then particularly looking at the inventory of the available staff, the clinical staff, the support staff across all of those enterprises. Then they started preparing clinical protocols in particular to identify the best ways to isolate patients that might be sick, and then certainly to help treat them, as well as protocols to help protect the staff that would be encountering these patients. And then the long-range planning of how to even prepare for the surge or significant increase in handling high volumes of very sick patients, particularly in the hospitals. Next slide. And what did that result in? That resulted in what I believe was the public acknowledgement that this was a real serious situation, that this pandemic was real. When we heard warnings from China, the World Health Organization, then the CDC, and then here in Virginia, we heard the governor declaring the states of emergency, and then the healthcare sector doing what they needed to do, I think that started to instill fear across all populations and all communities. And what that fear translated into was a fear to not come to places where they might be exposed to or might even get infected with the virus. So that included clinical settings, especially the hospital, physician offices, physical therapy centers, and even nursing homes, obviously the hotbed of where these viruses were starting. And this resulted in lower volumes in all those settings, and thus lower revenues for those healthcare sectors. That also resulted in less visits to the emergency department and to the outpatient settings to evaluate emergency and urgent conditions, such as heart attacks and strokes. And in fact, there was an increase in the in-home cardiac arrest and strokes, so that now the Virginia College of Emergency Physicians and the American College of Emergency Physicians are sending out ads and messages to inform the population and the communities and individuals that there are signs and symptoms not to ignore, such as chest pain, trouble breathing, headaches, that could lead to heart attacks and strokes, that have time-based therapies that could save their lives. Next slide. So that has led us to this changing environment where we are tele-everything, where we've always had telecommunications, but now the healthcare delivery system in particular is leaning on telecommunications and phone calls to stay connected with individuals, communities, and organizations. Teleeducation, particularly in health professions, having students and certainly patients receiving education from the online and virtual platforms, especially even at Eastern Virginia Medical School. Telemedicine and how clinical treatment is being provided by and through the virtual platforms. Teleworking, having all of our staff, both the clinical and administrative support staff, working remotely. And then telesocializing, where we used to have the water cooler conversations and catching up with our colleagues and our friends. Now we're having to have that virtual water cooler where we're looking at each other through a screen or online. Next slide. So in my perspective, there have been significant inspiring innovations. And when we look at innovations, I like to say that we started looking at what best practices were already there and how we leverage that to actually collaboratively respond to this crisis. So certainly within our campus, where we've got Centera Healthcare, Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters, and EVMS all occupying this geographic space, this opportunity of COVID allowed us to do what we do best, which is simply collaborate with each other and figure out the best policies to best keep our patients safe, everyone coming to this campus, but also to develop consistent procedural processes to protect the hospital staff. But also, we were able to do what EVMS is known for, which is significantly listening to and assessing what are the needs of our community. And as we were really hearing from and listening to our community beyond our medical campus, we were hearing that there was significant misunderstanding of what was being communicated in the media. There was a need for updated information about COVID-19 and what that meant for them here in our region. And so Dr. Brian Martin, one of the members of the class of 2020, actually helped host through his Masters of Public Health program at EVMS, a public health grand rounds on February 20th, which is available on our EVMS website. But even from February 20th through the several weeks since then, there was a significant need from our community to provide an update to that. So he and I were able to collaborate and to get speakers from EVMS, Centera, and CHKD to actually provide messages that were targeted to and catered for the community, and assuring that we were speaking at the layman's level in order for the community members to have a better understanding and a better source of information about what's happening here locally from our own healthcare experts right here in our region. And so on April 23rd, we were able to provide community education, and we've continued to provide various sets of virtual sessions for various areas that we've heard are asking for information, such as pregnancy, the pandemic, and what parents need to do. Another innovation has been when our regional hospital office and other physician leadership has been able to meet by call, particularly focusing on adult healthcare. So we've been meeting each week, but now we are going to need to incorporate our colleagues from CHKD because of the implications that we're seeing in the pediatric population. Next slide. So when we start to look at what are the lessons that have been learned, let me actually continue to brag a little bit about EVMS. When we look at additional inspiring innovations, I really want to highlight how we've had some very creative and diligent staff, especially within Connie McKenzie's shop, again, a member of the Civic Class of 2020, who has been able to transform events to virtual celebrations. And many of you have heard that Match Day for medical schools, medical students in particular, is supposed to be this celebratory time when medical students get to celebrate with each other and also understand where they're going to be spending their next few years to pursue the career in the specialty of their choosing. This occurred in late March, which of course was right in the midst of the peak of the pandemic. And so I want to say, if you get a chance to look at our website and see a short video of how Connie's shop was able to transform Match Day from the typical in-person celebration to actually a virtual celebration to really honor our students and their efforts. And then on Sunday, she and her staff have already created a celebration for the graduation of all of our medical students and health profession students that you'll get to enjoy as well. We also, in addition to EVMS, certainly all the academic institutions have creatively started to develop online experiences for our students. And that could be anywhere from learning how to provide education this way, talking to a microphone and a camera, and then having that played virtually live, streamed for the students, or having it recorded and viewable later. So again, we want to certainly applaud all of our educators, especially at EVMS, but particularly across all of our educational institutions in our region, for being creative on how to adapt very rapidly to this new environment. And then certainly having to be efficient in having virtual administrative and collaborative meetings to keep our business of serving our community going. So lastly, looking at lessons learned. When we start to see what are the lessons learned, I would say these are lessons that are continuing to be learned. So next slide. When we're looking at what we are seeing, we can certainly acknowledge that COVID-19, additional inspirations. Dr. Abahamid, who is our chair of EVMS OB, actually worked with volunteers of our EVMS students to assemble 500 face shields that were delivered particularly to our medical group in our high-risk specialties such as OB and ear, nose, and throat. So great innovations there. Our EVMS students involved with our medical Spanish and medical French actually translated information and provided that information virtually as well as printed to the Spanish and French communities. And the Brock Institute helped provide COVID-19 infographics that were provided by CDC. We were able to print that and share that with the Norfolk public housing communities and Portsmouth public housing communities. Again, sharing information for communities that may not have gotten that information otherwise. Next slide. So finally, we'll get to some of the lessons learned. We can certainly all acknowledge that COVID-19 has impacted everyone. But I would say some of the lessons that are being learned is that COVID-19 is impacting everyone differently. And that certainly depends on the situation before COVID-19. So depending on where people live, depending on their resources, depending on their education level or the way that they were receiving education, and the support that they were already having before COVID-19 could certainly cause a differential in how COVID-19 was impacting them from very little to significantly. When we look at a survey that was implemented by the Kaiser Family Foundation and was shared by the American Psychiatric Association early in the pandemic, late in March, approximately 1,200 people were surveyed by telephone. 53% of the women surveyed said that the stress that they were experiencing was related to the pandemic, compared to only 37% of men. Now, again, this is only one survey, small sample. A lot can be learned from looking further into that, whether the woman or the women who were surveyed were the primary breadwinners, or if they are responsible for cooking, cleaning, as well as the educational responsibilities for their children. I mean, there's a lot that can be looked at and evaluated in that realm. But also looking at the support system that was traditionally set up to be supporting very fragile populations, like for food insecurity and homelessness, now straining that with the additional 300,000 new unemployed Virginians since the course of this pandemic began, we can really see that there are lessons learned on how we can fortify that particular system. And in particular, when we look at the next slide, this is a snapshot from the Virginia Department of Health's website, where particularly if you look down towards the very bottom of your slide, this is looking at the cases of COVID-19 that tested positive in Norfolk compared to those in Virginia. And what I want to highlight there that looks like lessons learned and how we need to be learning more about is that disparity between those number of cases in the Black or African-American population in Norfolk compared to Caucasian and the other races, compared to the same rates of comparison in Virginia. And recognizing that across the country, we're hearing about these type of inequities and health disparities. And so we need to be learning more about why COVID-19 was impacting that particular population more than others. Was it inequities in terms of access to testing or inequities in terms of access to healthcare? So again, lessons being learned. And then now what? As next slide, as we recognize that you are graduating today from the CIVIC class of 2020, I would proffer that you are in a position to help lead the conversations about policy making, changing culture, but also relaying the sense of calm throughout our region. So you can help recognize that inequities that existed before COVID-19 were certainly exacerbated by this pandemic. Also acknowledge that everyone is human, whether that be your boss, your colleague, your fellow worship companion or faith organization member, congregation, or whether it's the community that you're trying to serve, and that everyone is dealing with this pandemic along the whole array of emotions, from very frustrated and just annoyed by some of the recommendations, but also quite fearful and potentially mourning the loss of a loved one, a friend, or someone within their congregation. So as you are returning back to work and entering in this new phase of, the post-pandemic, we need to have you hopefully be the leaders by modeling the recommendations of returning back to socialization. So definitely abiding by the hand sanitizing, the wearing the mask, and respecting the distancing between each other, at least until we know more and understand more detail about the clinical behavior of COVID-19, particularly when we get a treatment that's evidence-based, and also until we get a vaccine. And so next slide. So again, I will simply end by saying that you all have the opportunity to be those beacons of hope for our region, to help develop regional policies that will address and prevent those inequities that lead to health disparities. You could be beacons of hope within your organizations as you help change the culture and understand the changing dynamics and the need for flexibility as we all return back to work. And beacons of hope for our communities, where you worship, where you play, where you socialize, to help provide information and trustworthy resources, but also understand the dynamic situation where we find ourselves, and certainly with our families, to be a calming force for leading us all through this effort. And then lastly, just to abide by the words of President Lyndon B. Johnson, yesterday is not ours to recover, but tomorrow is ours to win or to lose. We have the opportunity, you have the opportunity to learn from what we know today and to help prepare for the rest of this COVID-19 pandemic, and more importantly, how to better prepare for the next pandemic that we see here. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So thank you so much, and I would love to answer questions.
Then thank you so very much. We really appreciate you helping us out today and sharing your insight there. I know you have an awful lot that you have been working on. In fact, I'll let you all in on a little secret. Sim was on email at 2 a.m. this morning, so she certainly has been incredibly busy throughout this entire pandemic. We do actually have some questions that have come in already. Just a quick reminder that if you do have a question, please type it in the Q&A function that's at the very bottom of your screen there. And actually, I'm going to try and promote, if we can, John Klein. So I'm going to say that, and I know that Megan is working feverishly on the back end there. John, I would love if you would like to ask your question live. John is with the Civic class of 2020, and I think we may have him be able to speak live now. Let's see it. John, are you? Yes, we can hear you. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Hi, John. Good morning.
I'm doing well. Good morning. Hey, I just wanted to ask, with the relationship between employment and healthcare coverage, what does the healthcare industry see as the future with the dramatic increase in unemployment of providing care for those newly unemployed, particularly as the COVID pandemic continues its course? Thank you.
Good, great question. And I will say, and I know your class is filled with senior leaders from several of our region's healthcare systems. So I would certainly invite them to add to my comments as well. I would say first and foremost, I think our healthcare system wants to take care of patients, and understanding that every healthcare system and every portion of our healthcare delivery system has suffered significant revenues and are trying to do the best they can to recover those revenues. But I think they're also dedicated to taking care of the community and patients as best they can. So I think just as strategies are helping to ramp up the business, they're anticipating that there are going to be significant more numbers of uninsured patients that will probably be encumbering significant health debt. So I think there's going to be ways for them to start working out strategies to help them pay back that debt if possible, but also start to work with particularly Medicaid, and looking at some of the policies that were developed with Medicaid expansion, and see how that whole insurance landscape can be adapted to start to accommodate the significant numbers who are now unemployed and likely have no insurance. So I think it's a matter of also seeing, as each of these individuals in particular that have started to submit claims for unemployment, hopefully some of the businesses that are now starting to ramp up may be able to hire back, or be able to hire some of those who've temporarily been unemployed, and hopefully be able to regain and recapture their insurance coverage. But I think this is going to be all hands on deck. And as I mentioned very briefly, that the fear of coming to the hospital and certainly to physician offices has really led to many conditions not being treated and not being addressed. So we want to try to help work as a team and work as an entire sector to be able to say, how do we accommodate and make sure that those who don't have insurance are not fearful from going into further debt by not getting their health treated. So I think it's going to take many conversations at all levels, but particularly around the idea of Medicaid expansion as well.
Thank you, Sin, and thank you, John, for your question as well. It was an excellent question. We have several more questions, and obviously, in the essence of time, I'm actually going to promote, I think I can do it. I'm actually very impressed with my technical abilities here, but Admiral Rock is in the Civic class of 2020, and I am going to see if I am able to promote him to be able to talk. So, Admiral Rock, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for all that you are doing to so selflessly help others. It really is impressive, and I really enjoyed your presentation. One of the things we're struggling with within the Navy is what normal looks like, and how we establish the criteria and then measure it to assess the path to normalcy, however you define it. So I'd be grateful if you could share your thoughts on what normal looks like for EBMS, and some of the criteria that you were using to assess that pathway.
Excellent. Charles, thank you so much for that question. And I'm very happy to start. And again, you have two incredible leaders in your class, Dr. Brian Martin and Connie McKenzie, who I'm sure can add additional thoughts. I would say from my perspective, EVMS's normalcy is going to be based on, are we achieving the mission and the mission areas that we traditionally have been pursuing? So as you all know, EVMS is your medical school, the only medical school in our region. And so we are a workforce pipeline for our 757. And in fact, we have 2,700 EVMS alumni that are working right here in our region. So I would say what normal will look like is, how are we continuing to achieve our mission in our educational, clinical, and research realms? And knowing that the circumstances have changed, what are our opportunities to accomplish those missions in light of the COVID-19? So I would say starting particularly with our education. And as you all know, we do have our health profession school as well as our medical school, but we also have our residency programs. So we've got students, we've got physicians in training, and then we've got our faculty. So when we look at the number of applications that are coming in, assuring that our students are graduating and graduating on time, and then certainly having our medical students matching into residencies, I think those are all part of the metrics of how we know we're going to continue to get back to the normal at this new state. As far as our clinical care, looking at how we are reaching out to as many of our patients as possible. We've already launched our Follow My Health, which is an online platform, and starting to measure, the number of patients we've been able to connect with, the number of patients we're able to virtually have visits with, but also those who get triaged to say, you know what, you need to come in to be seen in person and abiding by the new guidelines of spacing, hand washing, and wearing masks. Certainly within our research, this is really a great conversation, and it's causing great excitement to say, how do we continue the funded research that we've already been pursuing, ramping that back up, but also we're involved in looking at, and we're going to be hosting a forum sometime in the near future to talk about what is this opportunity of COVID-19 allowing us to even get additional research opportunities around within EVMS, but certainly in partnership with our other healthcare systems, and certainly with other sectors like within the business and nonprofit community. What can we do to actually learn more about COVID-19 from a biologic clinical standpoint, but also to address those health inequities and health disparities. So, again, those are I would say the same type of metrics, just modified in the context of the COVID-19, and certainly recognizing that the whole human resources portion of who's going to be more effective and efficient working remotely versus coming back on campus.
That's wonderful, Sen. Thank you so much. And Admiral Rock, that was a great question. Actually, I've got Connie, who is here. I'm going to try and promote her in a few moments to maybe see if she has any additional comments to say on that. But I did want to share with you that Bob Geis just noted that the city of Chesapeake is planning on a soft reopening of the city facilities on Monday, the 18th of May. So I think people are beginning to look at what that is going to entail. And so I think sharing best practices is going to be incredibly important. We all learned last week about the 757 Recovery Forum, and we highly encourage you all to use that as a resource, but also to use your fellow civic alumni as a resource as well. We're all in this together. And so if we can share best practices, that is going to be incredibly helpful as we move forward. Connie, I'm not sure if you're there. Let me see if I can unmute you. If you have any other additional comments or anything that you'd like to share with the class on the work that you all have been doing with EVMS.
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to bring some comments. Thank you, Sen, for being here with us. It has been a really interesting time, quite truly, for the medical school. Part of what I do for the medical school is I oversee the philanthropy as well as alumni relations. So I can add to what Sen has commented on in terms of the difference in the medical school opportunities and the ways that we're delivering on both philanthropy and alumni relations. We had to pivot quite quickly, like many a nonprofit, to figure out our resources and how we could help during this crisis. We changed all of what we were doing in terms of fundraising. We changed our efforts to be able to support the needs of our campus during this crisis. shifted, and the community responded quite well to that. We had to change the way we were going about doing that. Most fundraising in this world goes about person to person, and of course we're not in person these days, or you were sending direct mail, and mail was not the opportunity to take at this moment when people were reluctant to open their mail, or there were phone-a-thon, which many nonprofits do, and that was not well received if we were calling people all over the United States, perhaps in hotspots. And for higher ed, mostly alumni are the way to go about getting some of those resources. Well, our alumni are front line right now. And so asking for those folks to focus right now on supporting the campus at this time was not the opportunity for us. We had to think creatively. And I'm pleased to share that for us and for many of our healthcare partners across the area, people stepped up quite rapidly. And you're seeing this in the news across the United States. Folks are realizing the crisis and they have to step forward in different ways. And we had a number of different corporations and foundations come forward. They realized that we needed the support in terms of some of the areas that Sin highlighted, such as providing the PPE, such as providing some of the things to deliver the telehealth. Quite frankly, beyond just being able to make phone calls, people needed the IT support. They needed the ability to have headsets. And even some of our own patients needed some things on their end to be able to receive the support in some of the more rural settings. In addition, we were able to reach out to a number of community groups that stepped forward and made thousands of masks for our staff, for our faculty, for our students, and then for our incoming residents. And what I see for the future is this will continue to go forward. The last piece on our alumni relations area, and I think this is true probably for our folks at ODU and other higher ed institutions, is we had to find different ways to support our alumni during this time. They're struggling on the front lines. Some of them are frankly not working right now because they were considered non-essential if they weren't on the front lines. And so we found different ways of providing support while doing this remotely. So it's been challenging in different ways, but we find some really good ways to be able to do it. And so I think we're going to have to continue in that way for quite some time.
Connie, thank you so much. I appreciate your insight there, and we appreciate you dropping in, and I appreciate just putting you on the spot there. I do have Tricia Russell actually has a question and a comment, so I'm going to promote Tricia, are you there? I'm going to unmute you. You should be able to speak in a few seconds. There you go. Would you like to ask your question?
Good morning. I've heard from several other nonprofits that we work with that work in the sexual assault field that there are victims of assault, abuse, that are afraid to go to the emergency rooms for fear of being exposed to COVID or of the emergency rooms being overrun with cases. And I'm just curious as to whether or not we should be encouraging them to go there to receive treatment, and if if it's something that you all are pushing out, that it is safe and that there are guidelines in place to protect patients.
Yes, and thank you so much, Shidra, for that question. Just so you know, at this time, most emergency departments now are still about 25 to 30% at lower volumes compared to normal operations. So it is not necessarily being overrun by hordes of patients at this time. And the fact that all of our hospitals are seeing a significant decrease in the number of positive COVID patients within the hospital and certainly within the ICU and on ventilators. So we have definitely seen the crest down for the number of cases. In addition, all hospitals, starting with the emergency department and then certainly every element and every unit in the hospitals, are taking significant measures to assure that the environment, the physical space, the chairs, the doorknobs, everything are cleaned appropriately and safe for patients to come. So I would say yes, to please encourage any patient or any individuals that would traditionally come to the emergency department for something like that, an urgent, that it should be safe to come back. However, it's also prudent to also set the expectation to them that they will be processed a little bit differently. They may be asked at the front door or as they're approaching to be screened, whether it's by a questionnaire of the number of symptoms, travel outside the country, or exposure to a positive known person. That will trigger a different set of processes than if someone answers no to those. And then also it's the expectation for, particularly at EVMS and Centera, and I believe the CHKD, for universal masking. That means that patients are going to be requested to have masks and facial coverings, and they should also be expecting that the healthcare providers, from the person checking them in and asking about their demographics, to the person checking their vital signs, and certainly the nurses, physician assistants, etc., will be wearing masks. So I think trying to set those type of expectations will help relay the fear that they shouldn't come to the hospitals anymore, but rather they should be coming particularly to get the care and evaluation that they need.
Thank you, Cyn, and thank you, Trish, for your question. We have Thomas Chamberlain, who's with EdLogix, and Thomas, I'm going to try to promote you so that you're able to ask your question live, sir. I'm not sure if you're still able to do that. There we go. All right, Thomas, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Cyn. That was a great presentation, and you guys are doing some amazing things. And you're familiar with what Healthier 757 is doing and the program that's being promoted out in the community for our local citizens, rewardsforhealthyliving.com. But we're getting some really good uptake on that. And I just wanted to make sure people are aware of that and we can put that out there into the community. But if you wanted to comment on that,
Sure.
That would be great.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you so much. For those of you who may not have heard about the healthier757.org, it is an online gaming platform where people are able to learn about various conditions, and there's even a module on COVID-19, diabetes, and other common health conditions. And as I was alluding to previously, when we're looking at some of the health disparities where outcomes for particular health conditions particularly are burdened or are impacting specific populations, one of the key ways to avert that and to change the system and the infrastructure is to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to achieve health literacy. And health literacy is not just targeted to those who don't have resources or those who are most at risk. Health literacy, I believe, is more of an equalizer that everyone should understand about the healthcare delivery system, about ways to stay healthy and well, but also ways to handle and control chronic illnesses like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, obesity. And so Healthier 757 is one of the types of platforms that is actually capitalizing on the idea of the online opportunity and really taking advantage of the gaming idea where you can get rewards and celebrations by this online platform. And we appreciate the opportunity, Tom, that EVMS is trying to help partner with you to consider how we can actually adapt it for some of the populations that may not be able to get this type of information already. So we are certainly wanting to explore additional conversations on how we can engage our community on getting their feedback, particularly those in different age groups and certainly the youth, and see how we can take advantage of the concept of improving health literacy, particularly in preparation and managing a pandemic moving forward. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. We appreciate the question. And Cyn, thank you for your insight on that. So we have time for a couple more questions. I'm going to promote John Malfitano, also known as Gucci, to his fellow class members. I'm going to unmute you there. Gucci, the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Sarah Jane. Good morning, Dr. Romero. Quick question for you. Thank you for your presentation today. I don't mind telling you that I'm going to be referencing your Changing Environments slide in a broadband impact initiative presentation that we'll be giving later on this afternoon. So thank you in advance for that. Little disquieting news. I guess there's a lot of disquieting news lately, but disquieting news last evening when I saw a report that Joseph Fair, a virologist, epidemiologist, and NBC News science contributor, believes that he was infected after traveling on a crowded plane, but tested negative for COVID 4 times. Given, to have, if you can use the word, graceful reintegration process, a number of healthcare officials have stated that we have a need for sufficient testing, and by sufficient, you would think it's in quantity, but it's also in quality. What degree of confidence can we have that even if there is adequate numbers, that we'll come out of this pandemic, in a controlled way? Thank you.
Right, you're welcome. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Gucci, and I would love to talk to you about how you got that nickname. But first of all, I was not familiar with that particular story, and I would be very curious to understand what for testing he received, because there is certainly the protein base or the polymerase chain reaction, which is utilized mostly in the acute setting to diagnose, and then there's the new, what we call the serology or the antibody testing that usually will actually be helpful more in the surveillance, monitoring, and trying to determine if someone needs to be taken out of isolation, et cetera. So I'd be very curious as to which of those tests he had. But certainly your question of, do we understand what's going to be happening and how we're going to make it through, even with all the testing that's going to be done? I would say that's part of the unknown at this point, because we are just now learning about the prevalence of COVID in non-symptomatic people. So for example, in our community, we understand that people who don't have symptoms, that there's a prevalence rate of 1 to 2% of people who are carrying the virus but don't know that they have it. In our own healthcare system, Dr. Margaret Baumgarten was able to do her own prevalence study within healthcare providers that she has been able to test, and that prevalence rate is about 15% of symptomatic. And then within the hospitals, it ranges about 22% of the patients are positive for COVID. So at this time, as we're trying to implement more testing to understand who has it and who doesn't, there's still a large question of who and when to test and with what tests. So I would say at this time, what we need to do is be mindful of, what the departments of health are trying to monitor in terms of the acute documented individuals, utilizing the antibody tests appropriately and understand what those methodologies are, and then really taking advantage of the surveillance system that's already in place to look for outbreaks everywhere and understand that if those situations where we start to see an uptick of true positives that are happening in the hospitals, in the emergency departments, in the community, we need to start going back to the implementation of the strategies to prevent the spread. But I think we can make it through this, and hopefully by just the natural course of the virus, there will be a downtime where we can start to recoup, get our supplies, and get our testing lined up. But I think it's going to be in the implementation and the strategies and the monitoring that we're going to see how this is going to evolve, and I think only time will tell at this point.
So I think we'll take a couple more small questions. I'm actually going to promote Margaret Moore, and if Margaret's there, she'll be able to ask her question. Let's see if we can promote her there.
Yes.
We're having a small challenge there. There we go. Margaret, you're live. Are you able to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate your presentation. It's been very helpful. I am the head of school for a small independent school in Norfolk. But I would be interested in your recommendations or thoughts that you have regarding the safe reopening of school systems, public and private, particularly around the protocols of safety with social distancing of our younger members of our population. We do know that children tend to be asymptomatic often and are very difficult to keep socially distanced from one another. But certainly the reopening of schools is going to be vital to the reopening of our economy, and we want to be mindful of doing that safely. I don't know what your recommendations might be around that.
Yeah, well, certainly the Virginia Department of Education has put out some guidelines that I'm sure you've been privy to as well, and there's been conversations across public and private schools about how to even prepare for that. So it almost sounds like you've got a couple of considerations. One is how to safely do it probably for your teachers and all the other staff, and trying to abide by those type of protocols and just being prepared, but then protecting the children. And as Dr. Harding, who is one of the class of 2020 can attest to, we are now starting to see a surge of clinical symptoms and scenarios that are occurring in the pediatric population that is of concern because they are presenting very differently than adults are. So you're right, there is a concern about how to safely provide the opening of schools, knowing that the population that you're going to be helping serve are some of the most at risk now too, the children. So I would say continuing to abide by the safety guidelines of cleaning and also assuring that the kids are aware and educated. There are some cartoons and other videos that, again, the Department of Education is trying to promote to allow the children to understand about wearing masks and washing hands. Just like trying to teach any new behavior, it's going to take time and certainly dependent on their age. But I would say it's really in the hands of the administrators, knowing the population of the students and the families that they're serving. So, for example, one of the things, if there is going to be an element of teleeducation, knowing that the teachers feel comfortable offering the lessons online, but on the other side, understanding that the families have equal access to the devices, whether it's cell phones, whether it's tablets or laptop computers, then having the internet and the plans to be able to have enough time to conduct those lessons. So I think for your employees, continuing to abide by the safety recommendations of what they need to do to keep themselves healthy and protected, but also considering the children and allowing them to be as educated as possible to do their part as well. But again, I think it really depends on the community that you're in and the families and the confidence that you have that some of those practices can be abided by. And if they're not, then schools are certainly in the position to say we can delay another period of time, but then to be able to reassess as soon as possible to get the schools back in session and certainly to get the lessons relayed to the children.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent question. We're going to do one more question. We've got Julie Williams-Bird here, and I'm going to promote her. Hopefully we'll be able to, let's see if we can get her unmuted. There we go. Let's see. There we go. Or maybe not. Maybe I'll ask for you, Julie. Let's see. No. All right. So she was asking, she's actually a regular blood donor, but she's fearful of donating blood. How's the Red Cross making blood donations safe?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question too. So the Red Cross has, at the beginning, implemented strategies to make donating blood very safe and has continued to host blood drives, but also allow individuals to come to the Red Cross. But even more so, you'll hear more about the plea for those who were diagnosed, confirmed to have COVID by any testing, to, once they've survived and continued to heal and have been about 28 days without symptoms, they are being encouraged to donate plasma. And that's what you'll hear about, the convalescent plasma, because in individuals who are suffering from COVID and very ill, there has been some cases that have actually improved with the antibodies that are donated from others. So number one, you are safe, Julia, to give blood like you normally have, and thank you so much for that sacrifice. But also, again, encouraging those friends and family members that you know that have had COVID-19 and are doing well to consider helping others by donating their plasma.
Thank you, Cyn, and thank you so much for your presentation this morning and your time. I hope that you're going to go and take a very long nap, a well-deserved nap. We are so grateful to you and for the incredible work that you do every single day in the community. So thank you for being with us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And again, congratulations, Civic Class of 2020. You are the best.
Thank you, Cyn. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit, and I know that our team is working to get our next set of panelists up and running. Many of the services that our community has relied so heavily upon during this pandemic are provided by our robust nonprofit community and volunteers. We've seen innovation, collaboration, and most importantly, compassion And we're joined today to talk a little bit more about this third sector of the 757 economy, also known as the nonprofit community, which really has become the backbone to so many during this pandemic. We have with us today Stephanie Gorham, Kasia Grzelkowski, I practiced it too, oh man, and Tracy Keller and Anthony Walters. I'm going to introduce each of our panelists for the session individually, and they're going to share a little bit about their organizations, and then we will open the session up for questions and conversations. I've been enjoying the fact that everybody's had the opportunity to talk live and ask questions, and we want this to be a very open and fluid dialogue. So it's not really a formal presentation, it's really kind of the power of the minds that you see in front of you right there. Our first guest today is Stephanie Gorham. She's the Executive Director for Volunteer Hampton Roads and a proud member of the CIVIC class of 2019. Stephanie is a seasoned nonprofit development professional with more than 15 years experience working for various nonprofits in the Texas area, and most recently served as a development officer supporting the Tidewater Community College Foundation. During her time at TCC, Stephanie raised funds in support of numerous scholarships, student leadership programs, and needed equipment for the student programs. She began her career in Texas, where she served as the Vice President of Resource Development for the United Way of North Texas and the Director of Development for CASA of Red River, Texas. Stephanie, the virtual floor is yours. Let's see if we can unmute her. There we go.
How's that? Can you hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to the class of 2020, the second best class ever, I think. Yes. It's a pleasure to be here. Volunteer Hampton Roads. It's the organization that I humbly get to serve. And our mission is we're connectors. We like to connect businesses with opportunities to volunteer. We like to connect nonprofits to the human capital and honestly any resource they need to achieve their mission. And we also ultimately connect and mobilize a community to create change through volunteerism. We've been around for 63 years. I have not. And we have changed with the community as the needs have changed. One of our biggest programs now is we match individuals in the community to skill-based volunteering projects. We also match them to board member projects or board member opportunities within the nonprofit community. We manage volunteers. We have a virtual volunteer center, which is very much all we are doing now. We do background checks for our nonprofits. We have trainings for board members, volunteer management. We place court-ordered individuals that have to get that service. Group volunteers. We have a corporate volunteer council where we kind of try to create that network for businesses to really concentrate on their CSR and share best practices. We also spend a lot of time helping companies build their employee volunteer programs and giving them opportunities for corporate activation.
Thank you, Stephanie. You do an awful lot. Do you have time to sleep sometimes, maybe? Maybe not?
Yeah, here and there, here and there.
So our next guest was a member of the CIVIC class of 2010 and the president and CEO of VersAbility Resources. Kasia Grzelkowski leads a nonprofit that serves over 1,700 people with disabilities in early childhood, residential, day support, and employment programs that include nationwide federal contracting and manufacturing for diverse industries. Kasia is very involved in the community, serving as the treasurer of the Greater Peninsula Now and a former chair of the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. She is a member of the Ability One CEO Roundtable, RVA Hampton Roads Collaborative, Academies of Hampton Steering Committee, and serves on the boards of the Hampton Roads Chamber and the Hampton Roads Workforce Council. Kasia has received an Entrepreneurial Excellence Award and has been recognized as a woman of distinction and a member of the Hampton Roads Power List. Ladies and gentlemen, the virtual microphone is being passed to Kasia. Take it away, Kasia.
Good morning, and thank you so much for this opportunity. Again, congratulations to the resilient class of 2020. VersAbility Resources was founded in 1953, and we have grown to be the largest provider in Southeastern Virginia. We heard serving over 1,700 people with disabilities of all ages. We have 1,000 employees annually, over 50% of whom are people with disabilities. And yes, we are the third sector, and we are major employers. We serve all of the 757, and through our federal contracting, actually have created jobs as far away as Guam for people with disabilities. We are a comprehensive provider, starting at birth, serve over 1,000 0 to 3-year-olds to make sure they get the therapies to reach their potential. We have student services, day support, residential homes, and 4 diverse employment programs because people with disabilities want to work and be productive citizens of our community. We find ourselves, next slide please, we find ourselves in the interesting position of both providing a number of mission essential services and having to close some programs completely. So people with disabilities are going to work every day during this crisis when many of us are working from home and sheltering in place and providing mission essential services for most branches of the military. As just a couple of examples, we are responsible for loading all the food on ships for the US Navy. So that included in this crisis, quickly loading the Mercy to go to New York and the Comfort to head up the coast in California. We are providing custodial services. And as one of my colleagues said, a janitor may have saved your life today. And we have been asked to sanitize contaminated buildings. And our team continues to answer all of the global calls for Air Combat Command every minute and hour of the day and night. So they are on site performing their duties. Several of our commercial customers were actually deemed critical industries. So some of that work also continues at a high pace. So there are some of the examples of how people with disabilities are some of the most resilient in our community and demonstrating those strengths and contributing to our business community and our economy. At the same time, some of the folks we serve with disabilities are extremely vulnerable and among the most vulnerable in our communities. So that is creating tremendous change in how we support and serve them. We had to close all of our day support programs, and that means we sent about 200 people with the most significant disabilities home for their safety. As our industry may be impacted longer than most, we certainly are looking at phase 3, and even then questioning what is safe to do. We are innovating with some new programs, including an outreach program so that we are in contact with those individuals and families and providing them with activity kits and training and exercise and social meetups. And we have residential homes, which are essentially small nursing homes. So again, we are looking at, they may be sheltering in place for the foreseeable future, could be a year. What does that look like? So our team is pivoting to look at future scenarios, and we'll need to work with our community to make that successful. So thank you again.
Thank you, Kasia, and we really appreciate all of the hard work that you're doing in that area there. It is, I know it's a lot, but you really are serving, and you're doing an amazing job with that, so thank you. I have the pleasure to introduce to you Tracy Keller, who's another CIVIC Class of 2010 member. I think I might be seeing a pattern there. We are so grateful for Tracy, who originally approached us with today's programming idea, actually. Since 2005, Tracy has served as the Chief Executive Officer of the Girl Scouts of Colonial Coast, a regional nonprofit dedicated to improving the lives of girls. The region council I'll put my teeth in, shall I? The Region Council serving nearly 12,000 girls with the help of more than 5,000 adults in Southeastern Virginia and Northeastern North Carolina. Under Tracy's leadership, the Girl Scouts of the Colonial Coast has received numerous awards and recognitions. Tracy is very engaged in her community and was honored by Inside Business in 2018 with their Women in Business Award. When I think of the Girl Scouts, I think of Tracy Keller. Tracy, the virtual floor is yours, my friend. Let's see if we can unmute her. You got it? There we go. Let's see, try again. Try now, that's it. One more time, there we go, we got you.
Hello?
Hey, don't you love technology?
Oh, right. I do. Not today, though, but I usually do. Thank you so much for hosting this great session. I think it's incredible to stand virtually beside some of the strongest nonprofits in our region and show everyone how interconnected we all are, and that we really are a web holding the community together, especially during times like this. And so just quickly about the Girl Scouts, I think many of you all know about the Girl Scout cookie season. But I really want to make sure you all understand the Girl Scouts is so much more. We're about leadership and developing leadership in young girls to help create part of the workforce pipeline of the future. We all know that data shows that gender balanced leadership ensures that companies are stronger and have better results. And so our job as Girl Scouts is to help get the girls ready for those opportunities. Other things that you know about Girl Scouts are probably about community service. And you can see girls out every day doing something in the community to make our world a better place. And it's usually something that is super passionate and unique to that girl. And it's something that she's taken the time to discover more about herself, what's important to her. She's connected with the community to find out how to make something happen, and then she takes action to make our world a better place. And so you can see girls performing community service every day. And honestly, the cookie is where it kind of comes together. Through the Girl Scout cookie program, the girls get to practice those leadership skills that they've learned in their troop meetings. And then they earn the money that they need to ensure the success of their community service projects. So we are a large nonprofit serving nearly 12,000 girls in Greater Hampton Roads. And honestly, we do that because we have the breadth of volunteerism of almost 6,000 adult members who help ensure that Girl Scout happens in our community. We do employ about 55 staff members, and we have 5 properties that we own because Girl Scout Camp also is integral to the Girl Scout leadership experience. It's where girls really build their courage, confidence, and character. And so the impact that's happened through COVID has been most interesting to our organization because we are dispersed throughout the community. And so a lot of things have still happened in spite of COVID. It's just happened in a very different way. But thanks to our nonprofit sister organizations, we've really kind of linked arms and to ensure the success of each of us throughout this time. And so girls right now are meeting in a different way. Obviously, thanks to the digital skills that they've developed through earning their STEM badges, they're meeting remotely using Zoom for their troop meetings and logging on to programs that aren't just local anymore. It's actually enhanced the Girl Scout experience because they're participating in programs throughout the country with Girl Scout sisters in different states, as each council across the country kind of takes hold of this virtual programming and opens it up to all girls to learn things that are happening throughout the country. We do have to be very honest, as Kasia brought some of the challenges. The digital divide is real, and the digital divide is huge, especially right here in Hampton Roads, and we have girls that don't have access to those opportunities. And for those girls, we've connected with fellow nonprofits to ensure that badge kits are going out through the community feeding sites, through the YMCAs, through 4Kids and the YWCAs, to ensure those girls still have access to keep learning and keep earning their badges during this time. And of course, we'll talk later, but as you all know, the Girl Scout Cookie Program did succeed through COVID-19, but again, in a very different way. So Sarah Jane, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. We really do appreciate it. And we're sorry to everybody that we didn't have Girl Scout cookies delivered to their doorsteps. We should have done that, right? Maybe next time.
Next time.
So before I introduce our final guest, just a quick reminder at the very bottom of your screen there is a Q&A function. You're going to ask your questions to our guest speakers today through the Q&A function. Please do not leave your computer because we are going to make you speak live. So we will be calling you out. So our final guest speaker today is well known to his fellow class members of 2020. As the YMCA of Southampton Road's newest president and CEO, Anthony Walters did not waste a moment before jumping right in and making a difference. The YMCA is a nonprofit community-based health and human services organization that serves over 250,000 children and families throughout coastal Virginia, Northeast and North Carolina, and as far west as South Boston, Halifax County in Virginia. Anthony is passionate about making sure that the Y's doors are open to people of all ages, backgrounds, abilities, and incomes. His priorities include the work he does side by side with donors, volunteers, and community partners to ensure funds are available to those who would otherwise go without the Y's programs. Anthony, you and I have had many conversations about the potential in this region, and you are an inspiration to all of us. You inspire me to step up and make a difference every single day. Sir, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah Jane. You are very kind in your introduction, even things that we didn't write. You tend to litter in there, so greatly appreciate that introduction. And to the class of 2020, I salute you, and I know we're all glad that today has come. We do feel like we are entering the fraternity of the best class ever slogan, and so happy for today. We certainly know that we are among the most resilient classes ever, that's for sure, given the circumstances. So pleasure to be with everybody today, representing the YMCA of Southampton Road. I certainly know that through this time frame, I hope we can all return back to the facilities. My snack game is legendary right now, so I've got to get back on some version of a treadmill or a bike or something, or stop eating Tracy's Girl Scout cookies that I have in my pantry right now. So the YMCA of Southampton Road. Sir George Williams founded this organization a very, very long time ago, 1844, on the streets of London. He was trying to corral a bunch of boys who seemed to be going buck wild out there in those streets and trying to get them under control. And I think since then, the Y's been that pioneering force ever since. You could see some of the things that we've staked some claims to, shaped history through the invention of basketball. Now you can see it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Volleyball, racquetball. We've done some things in summer camps. We're hopeful that we can even start some of those summer camps real soon. Bodybuilding and the great life-saving skill of swim lessons, which we think is critically important, particularly because in our area we're surrounded by water, so it's really, really important, and we take a lot of pride in making sure we teach those lessons. We have a bunch of Y programming. Some of you in this audience and a lot of our families have been great volunteers for that. Some of us have come up through learning our sport on the Y field, getting that first lesson about sportsmanship, all those things, and we're very, very proud of that. I think we're more proud that people come together from all walks and all backgrounds through those gymnasiums. Doesn't matter what you do for a living, doesn't matter what your background is. It seems like you get all kinds of people who just enjoy being with one another throughout the week, and on that Saturday morning, you're just happy to be enjoying family. The USO, the United States organizations founded there, and Boy Scouts of America, Campfire Girls were all founded at the Y. Locally, we started here in 1860. You heard Sarah Jane talk about we're a nonprofit human services organization around here. About 250,000 children and families each year are served, and that ebbs and flows. And certainly we felt through this pandemic that we pivoted. I think typically most people know us as a membership serving organization, selling and growing our membership base. But when those doors closed, and for us that happened on March 16th, we quickly pivot to something a little more than that, and it becomes all about how do you make ourselves a community service organization. I think for a long time, it's no longer about transaction, then it becomes about transformation. And I think for us, you sort of are frustrated that you can't explain, or you can't articulate enough how much you're a nonprofit. Something like this puts you right on the front line of that. And then finally, you can see we serve anywhere from coastal Virginia all the way down into North Carolina. So for us, we're following 2 executive orders. We're following Virginia's and we're following North Carolina's. And so I'm probably watching the news a little too much, a little bit more than I'm probably used to right now. But we must, because we're having to sort of ebb and flow based on the latest information that we're finding. And one of our wives is in South Boston, believe it or not, 3 hours away from here, and we're trying to make an impact in every community that we serve. So for those of you who have a WAD membership, we're very grateful that you hung on and stayed with us throughout this time frame. We want to have a WAD to return to. We've had about 65, 66% of our members hang in there, and another set of members that have put their membership on hold. And a lot of members have converted them into donations, so we've been able to sustain ourselves because of that. And for that, very grateful, very thankful, and we're hopeful that we're able to return to some sort of services this Monday. So look out for that, and hopefully we'll come into the merge lane on May 26th. So with that, turn it back over to you, Sarah Jane.
Thank you, Anthony. Yeah, you're certainly juggling an awful lot with you having to cross the borderline there too. I know that that's a lot of work, so thank you. We do actually have some questions, and so in a few moments, I'm going to promote some of the folks to be able to ask their questions live. Again, just as a quick reminder, there is a Q&A function at the very bottom of your screen. That is where you're going to ask your questions, so be sure to type your questions in the Q&A. The chat is for if you need technical assistance from our team members. So the very first person to ask a question is Karen Priest, and Karen is in the Civic class of 2020. And so I am going to try and unmute Karen so she can ask her question live. Let's see if we can do that. Let's see. There we go. Karen, you should be able to ask your question live. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks, Sarah Jane. I know one of the things in the Hampton Roads community that we have been struggling with for some time is just behavioral health, and in particular behavioral health services for children. And it seems to me, and this isn't directed to just one of the organizations, but I'm just curious if they could respond on their thoughts on how we help the children come out of this from a behavioral health perspective, and if you're ramping up any services to, offer some kind of counseling through the Girl Scouts or the Y, some group therapy. I just think children are under tremendous stress right now, seeing what their families are going through. We've seen an uptick in domestic abuse and child abuse, and they're worried about their education and what that's going to look like. So just wanted to get the not-for-profits to respond on that for me.
Thank you so much, Karen. I really appreciate your question. So why don't we, the first person, maybe Tracy, would you mind taking that from the Girl Scouts perspective? Do you mind answering that one?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I think that's a fantastic question. It certainly is a very confusing time. And so for Girl Scouts, we've been, with our staff level, we have been taking extra time with our volunteers, having weekly chats with them to hear from them, because they're the ones who directly serve the girls in Girl Scouting. And so talking with them and seeing how their mental wellness is, because I think what we've realized is that we're all juggling quite the load right now. I myself am a mom of 4 teenagers who, trying to navigate school and work and just keeping our own families going. Those folks who continue to step up to volunteer are simply angels on this planet right now, that they would say, I'm still going to be committed to my volunteerism in spite of everything that's going on. And so they have become a source of encouragement, but we also recognize our job is to be there for them. And so we've really worked with them on the healthy living aspect of Girl Scouting. We have 4 pillars. One is STEM, entrepreneurship, financial literacy, healthy living and life skills, and the outdoors. And so we've really been talking a lot about right now that the virtual world is definitely where everything is happening and how we have to connect right now, but it's so important that we put that down at certain times of the day. And so this is going to sound like an oxymoron a little bit, but we've been doing virtual outdoor programming. And so we're connecting with our folks to talk about activities that they can then go do, send them outside on their own to go do them, and then maybe they're uploading pictures of the projects they've done or sending in the reflection of what they've learned through that activity. And so teaching those healthy behaviors such as, getting outside, putting the computers down, sometimes taking that walk, talking it through, reflecting on what you're feeling and sharing that is super important. But I'm going to go back to that community service, Karen, and I know that you used to also be a Girl Scout, and or believe anyways. And the community service is really where a girl can say, this may be out of control right now, but I can make a difference, and there's something that I can do. And when she does something, like Mr. Rogers said, look for where the helpers are. And then we can teach our girls that they can be helpers right now. So from making masks, we had a girl story when she started making masks, it went up to the Weather Channel, and we saw girls who then averted not being able to have cookie booths sell their cookies on a virtual cookie booth that they created with a fun jingle that made the press, and actually was hosted on Good Morning America, on how they sold their Girl Scout cookies to deliver to the folks working the front lines right now. And those girls are going to be okay. It's really hard, but they'll be okay because they can see that they can make a difference in spite of all the challenges. And so I think that also promotes mental wellness right now. And then honestly, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to link arms with our nonprofits, and we're going to call Stephanie and go, who's doing this right now? Can we get something for our volunteers or for our girls? Or we'll call other agencies who have the experts in the mental wellness field if we need to, and we'll link arms with them. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate that. So Anthony, I know that the YMCA has been providing childcare for essential personnel out there that need it. I'm wondering whether you're seeing an uptick in stressors for the children that are watching their parents as the essential personnel going to work every day, and whether or not that's creating any challenges that you're seeing out there when the children are in the daycares.
Frankly, no. So when they're in the YMCA for essential child care or emergency child care, not even a chance. They're in there. It's a great environment for them. Feels very normal from that perspective. In fact, the way we're going to go into the next phase of our sort of bridge to camp, we're actually calling it Camp Hope, because we don't want it to be sort of denoted as emergency child care or essential child care. We're going to sort of aptly title it as something that gives us a sense of, let's get to the next era of this. Let's give us a feeling of hope. Will be point one. Point two, we still have virtual children's curricula going on as we speak right now. So parents could get on. We have virtual wellness, but we also have that virtual children's curricula where our staff, we're making it a contest. So they're coming in costumes, getting on that camera, and they're competing for who can have the best costume and read that children's book with the greatest enthusiasm under the sun. Thirdly, we have presented to all of our school systems as we go into before and after school preparation and planning that we're going to really make a hard shift into social, emotional, and behavioral health curriculum, really trying to prepare our young people for the school day through before and after school programs. So, we understand that our expertise isn't necessarily going to be in preparing them for that end of course test, but where can we help them through some of the mental health challenges? And then finally, it's going to be a very significant part of our strategic plan going forward. Mental health, while we don't believe that we are today the experts, we're going to prepare and train ourselves to become more of the experts, working with the experts through training, through staffing, et cetera. So we understand that this could be a very traumatic experience right now, but how we prepare ourselves going into the next immediate era of this is going to be critical.
I love that positivity that you're creating in that environment too. I think that's wonderful. Kasia, I know that you have some thoughts on that question too. So passing it over to you.
Right. Our team is continuing, our early childhood team, to reach out to all of the children. So they're doing that obviously remotely, continuing screenings and that support to the families as well who are struggling with going through this. And I have a child with a disability or a challenge. That really is a wraparound program for the family. And again, we've initiated this new program that we're calling Reach Out. And it really is a mental health program. And we anticipate we will be delivering, that service to meet that need for a very long time. And the individuals and their families, some of whom do not understand what is going on, may think they did something wrong. So we're going to be doing tailored kits. The people who are going to be reaching out to them are going to be our staff members who know them best. What activities will help them get through this being healthy and safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasia. I appreciate that. That's wonderful. It really is. Kathleen, Kathleen Karup, I am going to try to unmute you. Let's see if we can do that. Let's see. We may have some challenges with getting Kathleen to ask her question live. So her question was actually for everybody sitting on this panel. How has the crisis impacted philanthropic giving to your organizations? Why don't we throw this one first off to Stephanie, if that's okay. Stephanie, can you talk a little bit about how this crisis has either created an opportunity or maybe some challenges with regards to philanthropic giving?
Yes, so it's had a huge impact on philanthropic giving. For our organization, we had to cancel our annual fundraiser like many nonprofits did. And so there was a huge hit to our budget for this year. We also do a lot of volunteer projects that have a fee for service. And because of social distancing, we've had to cancel all of those, which has had another negative impact. However, when I look at how the business community and the, just all philanthropic giving in our community, it has really been amazing to see how people have stepped up and given to traditionally referenced direct service organizations right during this time. So there are nonprofits, that aren't necessarily direct service and reaping the benefit of that, but it is still amazing to watch. I can't think of a business that hasn't stepped up right now to help out. It's being part of that community. That's amazing to watch. So.
Thank you, Stephanie. And you really have been out there on the front lines. I know that you've seen it firsthand, and the amazing work of those volunteers too. So it's not just about the philanthropic giving, it's also about stepping up and taking time out of your day to be one of those bodies on the front line too. So thank you for your work with that. I'm going to actually throw it now across to Tracy. Tracy, how about for yourself? Have you seen any impact from COVID-19 with regards to philanthropic giving in your organization?
Yes, we were fortunate. We were just a couple of weeks ahead of Stephanie, and so we were able to hold our large fundraiser, our Samoa Soiree. Where we're seeing a change right now, which is very concerning, not just to Girl Scouts, but to organizations like ours who maybe aren't the first responders in a crisis, is we're starting to see some of our grant funders, even those who had committed funds, giving us a phone call and redirecting those funds. And I certainly understand that because I myself give personally to those frontline organizations for, food, transportation, and shelter. However, a lot of nonprofits didn't go into COVID in a great financial robust standing, maybe not as healthy as they would have liked to. I don't think anybody predicted the length of this crisis. And so I do think some organizations are going to have permanent change from this because a lot of the funding is being diverted to those frontline agencies. I think the health of our nonprofit community is at risk, potentially, if we don't recognize that many agencies who aren't going to get funding right now will be permanently changed, some smaller ones possibly even having to close. And so it's important that the health of all nonprofits be considered right now, or at least we're on a timeline where we know where some of those fundings will be able to come back, or our services may be eliminated from the community, which then will create more of the situation. For instance, if Anthony and I don't have funding for our youth right now to give them positive experiences in the middle of a crisis, we're going to hold our own right now. But if that continues into the long term, those children then could be some of the ones needing first-line care next for mental wellness and mental health and possibly physical conditions. And so it's important that we consider all nonprofits right now, at least with a pipeline and a timeline.
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, I think, you know, obviously CIVIC's in the nonprofit arena as well. I think what we're looking at right now is the fact that this is going to have long-term implications for fundraising into the future. There's a lot of uncertainty as to whether or not anybody can hold events in the fall and what that kind of looks like and what the new type of event will have to look like to fall in line with the, you know, making sure that we're keeping everybody safe. So I know that that's a big concern. I will say that there's been this symbiotic relationship between the nonprofit community and the business community. And I'm actually going to throw this question over to Kasia to talk a little bit about that relationship and the support between the two, and the important role that the people on this call today and our CIVIC alumni can make sure to maintain our nonprofit community and make sure that those services don't disappear. Kasia, would you mind taking the floor for a few moments?
Sure, and I think I'll start by saying, yes, we have been impacted. We also have benefited from some of those new COVID funds to help us launch our new outreach mental health program. But I'd like to challenge the leaders of this community to take this moment to kind of talk about two things. And one is we need to get over the myth that nonprofits can't have overhead. This crisis, I think, really illustrates that nonprofits need resources writ large, and some of that's reserves, but also the human capital to be able to sustain their missions and sustain a situation such as this, but also to innovate. I mean, I think you've heard all of us say we've had to pivot. It takes resources to meet new needs and to adjust service models, adjust to some funding evaporating completely. And then where do you look for some other support? So we absolutely need this to be a partnership with the business community in every way we've talked about. So it's both philanthropy. And I would add my second plea here is to look at multi-year funding. You know, that's what really sustains our organizations, but also is the resource that underpins something new. It is very hard to start a new program or meet a new need differently without knowing you have some sustainable funding. And then I am also a big proponent of pooled funding. We have a lot of intractable issues or difficult issues to wrestle with, and several organizations coming together to pool their resources allows nonprofits, one, to collaborate with each other, but I think really allows us to turn a corner on an issue or a population. So that concentration of both political will, leadership, as well as the dollar resource is how we actually get traction on and turn those corners on some of those issues. And then I just want to give a shout out, you know, we all partner with all three sectors of the economy, but our business partnerships, you know, we're mutually supportive. The commercial contracts we're continuing right now, they're incredibly grateful. They would be in a very rough position if we had to shut down our production operations, which at one point we thought we would. So I'll stop there because there's lots of other folks who have good thoughts here. So thank you.
No, Kasia, thank you so much. I know that when we had our planning call last week, Anthony, you were talking an awful lot about that symbiotic relationship between the business community and the nonprofit community. You'd already shared an example with us of how your members have supported you through this, a lot of them transferring their membership into donations. Do you have any other additional thoughts on or any additional comments on the philanthropic giving in the community and what you've seen for the YMCA?
Yeah, well, yeah, you know, our membership base, you know, we gave them options, you know, because it's really tough. You know, you close your doors and the first question you might have is, well, I'm not getting a service, and so you should stop. You should stop my fee. And we had a very good reaction at that point from our membership base that says, well, we want to, A, keep our membership dues going, because we want a Y to be preserved when this one day is over. And that conversation was fantastic, because I think at that point our members realized that the Y is actually theirs. It's not mine, it's not staff, it's actually for their community. And in order to sustain it, they sort of converted their membership fees into donations, which is, I mean, just unbelievable when you really think about that as, again, as a nonprofit sort of protected by that nonprofit status. And we found, and for me, during that time frame, I was sort of skittish about asking, to be completely honest about it. I'm thinking about all the individuals and all the things that they're going through personally, what all businesses are going through. And initially, I was sort of shocked by it and said, you know, I don't know if I want to ask them based on what all I had to do from a staff reduction standpoint, and all key leaders have to do on this call. But what I found is, this is where people wanted to come together. They wanted to come together. They wanted to help one another. And I think that was just beautiful when I really processed that. I think so. We started to crank up the ask and say, well, what bridges? And it was really creative thoughts around, hey, can we go from designated to, you know, can we undesignate that, for example, and use it for other reasons? And I was surprised at the number of corporate donors that said yes. We want to, or foundations that said, yes, we want to, let's figure out how to untangle that for you so you could use it as you see fit. I found that organizations and corporate donors were very giving. They were very, they initiated the call. How can we help? What do you need? And that was just enlightening for me, and I think for many of us on this panel. We think that should happen more. We think we should partner more, shouldn't take a crisis like this for that to occur. I think we had volunteers come from those companies say, well, how can we step out here? And obviously with the right safety measures in place and cleave and lock arms and make sure that we serve our community. It's a viable solution. It's to partner more, not just when emergency situations arise. Found a very generous base of corporate partners. Say we got to figure out ways to do this for all.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate that. And this kind of goes hand in hand with a conversation that we all had, which was a discussion about corporate social responsibility. And I would love to actually throw this one to Stephanie, who has worked tirelessly on trying to promote that side of philanthropic giving. And so, Stephanie, would you mind taking the floor for a few moments and kind of explain a little bit about what you mean by corporate social responsibility, and also how the people that are watching this webinar today can perhaps step up and make a difference?
Yes, thank you. So corporate social responsibility looks different now. I say this on both sides of nonprofit and business. The conversations that I've had is, you know, how it was cannot necessarily be how it's going to continue to be. For example, the needs, the fundraising landscape for nonprofits is different right now, but it'll be so different a year from now, 2 years from now. That long-term effect is going to be huge for the nonprofits. And talking to businesses, it's also huge for them. Businesses have been impacted by this, but they also want to continue that CSR, their philanthropic giving, their volunteer programs, and how do they do that? Well, that conversation is very healthy to have right now, but I really encourage them to have it with the nonprofit organizations. It's necessary to know the needs of the nonprofit industry right now. Not just, we want to know the first responders, the direct servers, what are their needs? But what you find is those nonprofits are collaborating with so many other nonprofits that make their work vital. That's the big picture that all funders need to hear about. And that's the conversation I think businesses, I encourage them to get involved in those conversations and listen to that. And then take it a step further and create almost a business roundtable, or take these needs to the business recovery plans. It should be very much a part of reopening the 757. And how do we recover as a 757? Well, how are we going to interact with the nonprofit sector. You know, it's not necessarily just giving through funds, which cash is king, yes, but human capital is amazing. We have so many requests right now for nonprofits that need help with, you know, they need help with how do they adjust their finances? How do they adjust their business plan? You know, website design. I mean, some of them are having to, for the first time, go to online giving. I mean, there's opportunity to adjust your CSR on so many different levels right now, but don't have that conversation just in-house. Invite nonprofits to the table and also your fellow business peers too, to see what that looks like.
Great, thank you so much, Stephanie. Does anybody else on the panel want to add anything about their thoughts on corporate social responsibility and maybe a call to action out there? Kasia, you look like you might want to.
I think I already kind of put a couple of mine out there. I absolutely agree. The conversation among nonprofits and business leaders, I will say Bank of America has been very effective in convening some of those. So we really focus on what are the biggest issues right now. What does our community need to have that resiliency, or go from recovery to resiliency and health. So I think those conversations are really important. And then, you know, as I said, I think some multi-year funding is tremendously beneficial to nonprofits.
Yeah, I would echo what Kasia saying about that. I just want to sort of punctuate. The key to us delivering is the sustainability, and the way to sustain it is by having a corporate partnership. That is paramount. I think we know how to deliver on that. I think our attention and our focus is about the consistency in doing that. I think we have the expertise to do that, but the ability to sustain it lies in our partnership with the corporate community. And I think that's what Kasia ultimately is referring to, and what Stephanie's referring to, and Tracy's referring to. It's about the sustainability of that long term. We don't want a fly-by-night service that we give the hope and dreams to our young people and people who are benefiting by this service. It pops up one day, and then the next day we have to stop it. That's counterproductive to the ultimate aim.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. Tracy, do you have any other thoughts on this?
Certainly echo what they all have said, and I would also say many of us, our board development committees are out working right now to recruit new board members and committee members, and we need your brain and we need your expertise. And so many of us have figured out how to make service on boards and committees much easier right now using Zoom meetings and that sort of thing. So we've kind of reduced some of the commitment, but we still want your expertise and we need it. So consider serving right now.
And I would just add, I think we as a community need to work with the businesses as well to be bringing in more younger and diverse leaders. I think many of us know we have the same wonderful leaders who keep giving selflessly and serve on multiple boards. And, you know, hearing some from young people that they like to serve, they're very generous and very giving, but want to serve in different ways. But we do need young board leaders as well. So perhaps another conversation is, how do we make boards more fun or more accessible multi-generationally?
I love that. Well, I actually have a young person who is on our call, on our webinar today. Her name is Destiny Harrell. This is a really great segue to allow Destiny, who is one of our graduated Civic Scholars alumnus, and I'm going to allow her, if she can unmute. Let's see if we can unmute her. Not sure that we can do that. Let's see. There we go. Destiny, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad that you are here. She has been a huge supporter of a Civic, and she still comes and attends the Civic Scholars programs whenever she can. And she has a great question for you all today.
Hi, Sarah Jane. Hi, everyone. As a young person who is considering starting a nonprofit, what is the greatest lesson you've learned from working in the nonprofit industry?
It's a great question, Destiny. So why don't we throw this one first off to Anthony? How about that? Putting you on the spot.
I think the greatest lesson I've learned so far Well, it is really about that board. So far, it's really about that board. That you've got to have great leadership, great volunteers. They can really make or break the organization. I'm very fortunate. I have an incredible group of volunteers who believe in our mission. They believe in our cause. They give of their time. They give of their talent. They give of their resources. And it's, as much as we want it to be about the staff, oftentimes staff, they will come and go. But the volunteers, they are volunteering, and they really believe in it. They sustain the organization in the long term, and they will be here. They carry the flame, and so it is about building a very, very strong board. And someone just mentioned that. I think it was Kasia that mentioned that. That board team is really, really important to really build that board, that volunteer base, to help sustain the organization.
Anthony, thank you so much. I'm going to throw this one to Tracy next. Tracy, you have been in the nonprofit arena for just a couple of years, right? So would you mind sharing kind of some of the greatest lessons that you've learned and kind of give any advice to Destiny, who I do believe is actually looking at some point for a career in the nonprofit arena. So I know the reason why she's asking this.
Gotcha. Well, Destiny, we would absolutely welcome and be thrilled to share in your passion and help you find the right place to make a difference in our community. This is actually a really hard question, honestly, and it's one I'll probably have a better answer for tomorrow because it's going to cause me to reflect, honestly, for a couple of hours. I think the biggest blessing of working for me and my growth point is it comes from equity, access, and inclusion, and the reality that everyone has something to share in our community. Everyone has something to give to our community. Our job as nonprofits is to help bring them together and bring the right folks together for the right time to make a difference in that area of passion of theirs. And so when I work in my organization and when I work with Girl Scouts, I get to bring all girls together, and the greatest gift is watching them figure out what their passion is, find their voice, and make a difference. And I think no matter what nonprofits you work with, that is your job, is to bring your base together, whether it be your volunteers or your clients, and help them grow in a way that they won't grow anywhere else. And for me, it's watching girls grow into young leaders in our community. And so it's about passion, it's about connecting, it's about inspiring. It's a great place to be, Destiny. We'd be happy to have you join us in the 757 in this way.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I appreciate that. Kasia, do you have any other thoughts on your greatest lessons learned?
Well, first I'll say, there are days when nonprofit work is really hard. I've heard someone say that we take on the challenges that neither the public or these cities and municipalities can take on. So again, close your eyes and think about our communities without all the things that our nonprofits do. And that, again, has to be part of our recovery. Now, that said, you really always need to be for yourself as a leader, keeping the mission and things that energize and inspire you in front. And that's both, for how you telegraph to your team, but also for your team. So I think, again, I am so inspired by the people with disabilities we serve and our team stepping up. And I agree with everything else that's been said, but you also got to have a really solid team. And again, that's part of where resources are important, to hire and develop and, cultivate the future leaders within your team as well. As the CEO, I'm out in front of the camera. I wish more people would be, but I'm standing on the shoulders of what our team does every day. So keeping that team, really, you've got to be agile and adaptable. We actually serve in many ways more constituencies than businesses do. So that's also something to think about. And one of our lessons, and one I think, again, for sustainability, is try to find a revenue generating activity that is an extension of your mission or that furthers your mission. So it's integral, not just chasing dollars, and again, I think whoever came up with Girl Scout cookies, one of the best examples I've ever seen of something that sustains their organizations while teaching the lessons. And the same for the Y, and the same for Volunteer Hampton Roads. They're fee generating. So that's part of you having more control over your revenue, not just being grant and philanthropy dependent. Those are all important in combination, but I think revenue generating activities that support mission. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kasia. You're right. I think that mission driven and the selflessness, I think, as well, of the people that work in the nonprofit arena, it's incredible to watch. So, Stephanie, I am going to ask you if you have any thoughts about kind of what is your greatest lesson from being in the nonprofit world, and do you have any other advice for Destiny?
Hi, Destiny. I absolutely welcome you to our industry because it's amazing, and I've been involved in nonprofit industry for 15 or more years. And I don't think I'd ever go to for-profit. There's something, it is difficult. It's not fun and, roses every day, but I'll tell you what, that passion's never gone. I wake up passionate going to work, whether it's difficult or not. Lessons learned, learn how to stretch that dollar. We would love to have overhead, but it's just reality. You're just not going to have it. So you learn how to stretch that dollar. Partnerships are so valuable. I try to get to know all of our nonprofit partners and see how we can fill the gaps in service with each other, because they understand stretching that dollar. Look at partnering with businesses, localities. Partnerships are huge, no matter what nonprofit organization you are participating in. Number two, volunteers. Volunteers, Volunteer Hampton Roads, but I have to promote that. But they really are. That is human capital. It's free labor. It's, it's a new relationship. It's just, there's so much that you gain from having volunteers in your nonprofit organization, and it stretches that dollar beyond. I think it's still maybe $12.34. I don't know. And the third thing is, don't ever look at your organization as something less value than a business, because it is a business, and you need to advocate for that business at the same table as any other business.
Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate that. I just saw a question actually pop up from Tom Steffens while we're talking about, obviously support for the nonprofit arena. He was asking about whether or not any of the nonprofits on the call today had received any assistance or the loans from the federal and state government, and did any of those make a difference for your organization? Does anybody want to take the floor on that? Tracy, you're nodding your head. Would you like to take the floor and share anything?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we were extremely fortunate to be able to qualify for the SBA's PPP program, and that honestly will hold our organization right now. If not, we would have been looking at potential furloughs and that type of situation. I don't think we all could have predicted what this was going to look like or the long term of it, but that certainly will help our organization tremendously. Right now, I also would say this is a great area where volunteers and the expertise would come into play, because I feel like I should be awarded my master's degree, because I always wanted to get my MBA. And I feel like these first 8 weeks of dealing with COVID and the extreme pace of this and execution of all of these things has it required all of us to step up and learn things that we never needed to know. And so Destiny, I would also just bring into that you're always learning as a nonprofit. It doesn't matter what you have already done or what you plan to do, you're going to learn some new things, and you might learn them during a fire such as this. But honestly, many nonprofits, I understand, were able to qualify, but unfortunately there was not enough funding for all of us.
We have a funny saying in our office that, every single one of us wears about 6 or 7 different hats in one day, and then we change them and we have another 6 or 7 different hats for the next day. So nimble's the word I think that I've enjoyed using just recently since COVID-19. But the truth of the matter is the nonprofit sector has been like that for forever and a day, and has always been able to turn on a dime and be innovative. Anthony, how about for yourself? With the YMCA being a little bit larger, were you able to take up on any of the fiscal assistance that was out there for COVID-19?
No, none of the programs fit our profile and fit our organization. Our head count simply too large. Some of these programs had a look back time period of 12 months with a timestamp of February 15th based on when you applied. And so our organization has been as large as 23, almost 2,600 people at times. We by the time we actually shrunk, it could be as low as 224 people. And so for us, it wasn't a fit. And so we withdrew our application from that process, not wanting to take up resources that other organizations could benefit from. So as a result, the impact is for us having to go through furloughs and layoffs and the like. So we reduced our staff actually all the way down to about 3%. So we right now sit at about 74 staff of our 2,200 roughly.
Right.
Sarah Jane?
Yes, Kasia.
Just quickly, we also were not eligible because there's a loophole that we fall into of a nonprofit with over 500 employees. But that said, again, thanks to some of our federal contracts and all, we have some sustaining sources at this time. We may need to be eligible for the future because, again, we're going to be closed longer than some others. Just quickly, the other thing we've been advocating on locally, federally, is access to PPE. And so I have to give a shout out to the Girl Scouts. They made us masks at a time when we could not get PPE. We still have an order we made 6 weeks ago that has face shields in it, and we haven't gotten it. So I also am really advocating, and maybe business community can help, is we need to be part of the long-term supply chain for PPE. Our houses are going to need that every day for, again, the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kasia. Stephanie, how about for yourself? Do you have any other thoughts on like the support that has been given to nonprofits fiscally from the state and the local governments?
Yes, so we were fortunate enough to be eligible to receive the PPP loan. And I found that when I talked to partners, those that worked with a lot of the local banks had access to that. And it's very much helpful for us right now. I mean, but I think our concern is, what does this look like in 9 months, 12 months from now? Like, this is not just going to go away. And unfortunately, I feel that a lot of the funders that have diverted their funding to help right now won't necessarily have funding to continue their gift to other organizations throughout the year. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. I'm actually going to throw, there's another question coming your way from Thomas Chamberlain. I'm going to try to promote Thomas so that he is able to speak. Let's see if we can do that real quick. There we go. Thomas, you had a question. Would you like to share that? I know it was focused towards Stephanie, I believe. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much, Sarah. Stephanie, I just wanted to give a shout out to the awesome work that your organization does, and particularly in the role of the healthcare professional volunteers that you have. You have a tremendous network of healthcare professionals that are looking to do great things. A good example being after the shooting, the horrible event of the Virginia Beach shooting, you played a major role in assembling very quickly healthcare professionals to help with counseling, mental health. But in this health literacy initiative, you and I have talked about using your healthcare professionals, dentists, using our platform to educate consumers on oral health care, or physicians and nurse practitioners to educate in a physical way using the platform, and maybe we're talking about in-person programs at the libraries or at the YMCAs and other areas, maybe more digital now, but I think there's a great opportunity to leverage those volunteers in the healthcare profession that you have access to really help the community really understand the importance of, chronic conditions, and an area that's really kind of taking less of a priority as COVID-19 is happening, but there's a major issue going on with lack of attention to chronic conditions and healthy habits and vaccinations. But I think your network is instrumental in really extending the reach of information and education.
No, thank you, Tom. You're absolutely right. And in fact, you know, the part that we like to really help with this area is our skill-based volunteers, and especially, you know, retired healthcare professionals and healthcare professionals that aren't necessarily on the front lines right now. We're looking to them to, you know, consider, you know, moving those platforms, those in-person platforms of, you know, doing those workshops and health literacy and communicating that, going virtually with it. I implore anyone that is interested or even associated with healthcare to consider that and reach out to Tom. He's great. The platform is amazing, and we're always looking for volunteers to help out.
Thanks, Stephanie. I know we have an awful lot of people in the nonprofit world actually on the call, on the webinar with us today, and with us unfortunately running out of time. We could probably keep this going for the rest of the day. I think there's so much to talk about. I do have one comment from Kathleen Karup, who is talking about you know, roles like Kasia's in the Chamber of Commerce is so important. Stephanie, you talked about the changes in the types of social responsibility, and that becomes more and more evident. And also, as Kasia said, people need to accept that nonprofits do have overhead. The increased connection between local and state chambers and the nonprofits will have an enormous positive impact. I think we can all attest that, you know, we've seen a lot more collaboration across the board, not just within the nonprofit sector, although I do believe that there's always been that network of support within that environment. But I do think that the business community and the nonprofit community have, during this crisis, actually stepped up and kind of created that web. My hope is that we continue that into the future, and that after COVID, this becomes the new norm, and that maybe there's more dialogue on this. So I wanted to thank each of you so much for being with us today. And I want to thank you as well for you and your teams for the work that you do. You are that underground support system, and oftentimes you are not right there out there in the headlines, but the work that you do is so incredibly important. So thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. And thank you for your friendship and support of CIVIC as well. We do appreciate it. And Tracy, great idea. Let's do this again sometime. I think that would be great. Yeah, big round of applause for Tracy. I do want to thank you all so much for being with us today and for joining us on our morning session. We know that an incredible impact that nonprofits make in the region. It's not just in the services that they provide, but it's also about the quality of life in our region. I know there were some folks who joined us today that were from arts organizations. Arts organizations are going to need our help tremendously once we're able to open up. They've been impacted. They've got musicians and artists around the region that are just ready to get out there and perform. And of course, we want to do what we can to support them when we can support them, when it's safe to do that. So please don't forget all of the different types of nonprofits that are out there and how you as individuals can make a difference in that.